Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm super glad to have you today with us on Election Science Office Hours, which is a webinar and a podcast. It's hosted by the Lynn Center for Science, Society, and Policy, also known as the LCSSP here at Caltech, and moderated by me, Michael Alvarez. Our Election Science Office Hours archive has almost 30 episodes, which is really exciting. These are all listed on the Democracy and Elections section of our Lind Center's brand new website at lcssp.caltech.edu. They're all on our YouTube channel. They're on our Spotify and Apple Podcast playlists as well. In addition, please make sure to follow LCSSP on social media for the latest updates on our work. We're pretty much everywhere. LinkedIn, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So we're all there. We're easy to find. So please follow LCSSP and you can follow all the work that we're doing with Election Science Office Hours, plus the other work we're doing in the elections and democracy space. So one last bit of housekeeping for those of you who are with us live this morning. If you have a question, please post it in the Q&A session on Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer it as time allows. Okay, so I am like really super excited this morning. Joined by someone who I have really wanted to get on this election science office hours for some time. Special guest today is Mike Moser. Mike's the founder of Moser Solutions and a consultant at the newly formed Election Security Exchange. And that's something we're going to talk about a bit later on. Mike, great to have you here this morning. Thank you.
Really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited we get to have our own version, the Mike and Mike show here. So thank you.
Yeah, we just need, like it should be Mike and Mike between palms, right? Two palms. So anyway, yeah, but it is kind of confusing to have two mics, but we'll work our way through that. So Mike is an election security subject matter expert with really extensive and really interesting experience securing critical infrastructure systems. Prior to the founding of Moser Solutions and working with the Election Security Exchange, he held key positions at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and the Pennsylvania Department of State. At CISA, he served as an IT Cybersecurity Specialist, providing the election security and resilience team with crucial expertise in election administration and security. At the Pennsylvania Department of State, he served as the Director of Election Security and Technology, where he collaborated with state and local election officials to strengthen election security practices. And we're going to talk about all that as we get deeper into our conversation. So let's get right to it, Mike. Welcome to Election Science Office Hours. And again, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
So you're now working in the private sector, heading up your own consultancy after several years working in state and local government in the CISA and the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office in Pennsylvania. How's that transition been for you? And can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing in election security through Moser Solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say the shift from government to independent consulting has really been one of the most meaningful transitions of my career, and certainly challenging at the same time. And the timing of all that was deliberate.
Mhm.
Really when you saw this rapid change in the operational environment last year, notably when there's the retreat, if you will, of federal resources. At that time, I was still with CISA and the Election Security and Resilience team. And it was, frankly, from a personal perspective, it was quite challenging to navigate that because you see like this rapid deterioration of support for colleagues in the field and former people we all used to work with or we worked with directly at CISA, in addition to those relationships that get built up at my time in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And the work didn't necessarily change and the mission didn't change. It was really just the manner in which we needed to pursue that. Um, and really that's where I kind of took that experience that I gained being inside government, both at the state and the federal level, and really getting the appreciation for the ground level understanding of how elections are run, where election officials might need support the most, and what type of support makes a difference. And so I made a deliberate decision to leave, probably a couple months after the support apparatus had changed at the federal level,
Mhm.
to really decide to go out there and do it on my own, and to continue. I care about the mission, personally and professionally, and so I just needed to change the platform in order to do that. So I've been really focused on kind of rebuilding those connections, and continuing to provide that, like, expertise and best practices that I can, as we're engaging with those in the field. So it's been an incredible opportunity.
So the clients here are state and local election officials?
Those are our clients, but I also do work with nonprofits in this space too, that they have varying degree of focus, but they're all focused on providing resources to state and local officials. So it might be, particularly as you mentioned, I am a consultant with the Election Security Exchange,
Mhm.
and that is really a one-stop shop, if you will, to provide trusted resources and peer-to-peer networking and connections for election officials to help them navigate the operating environment. And that might be us putting new resources together if we see there's a gap, or it might be us uplifting another partner in the space. Maybe they have a particular niche in, say, physical security, and someone else has a niche in running a tabletop exercise. We don't necessarily need to be the ones doing that. We want to be able to connect those in that space. But we also work with I also work with some of those nonprofits to do best practices and design for election technology, and for voter registration databases, but also how they're designing the online applications to be more effective for the end users, or voters in that manner, so
Mhm.
that they really, that's their first interaction with government at times, is registering to vote. And building on those lessons that I've learned over the years, would love to share those and help other jurisdictions implement some of those practices.
So let's talk a bit, step back, because I think I got a little bit ahead of myself because I was so excited to hear about what you're doing right now with election officials in particular. How did the work that you were doing at CISA, which first I'd like to learn a little bit more about, prepare you for the environment that you're now operating in, which is an environment where it seems that there's been quite a bit of a shift in support provided to election officials from the federal government to perhaps state governments and private enterprise and others. So let's start a little bit by hearing a little bit more about what you were doing at CISA, and then, how that really kind of prepared you to make this transition to setting up your own consultancy.
So I'd say first and foremost, one of the key roles that CISA really built up in the ecosystem of elections over the last couple years is really acting as a navigator, and helping to provide education and insight into what the national landscape looks like when it comes to threats, or um, operational considerations that were grounded in risk mitigation. But that national lens was really a key aspect of what was being accomplished at CISA, and they were also really a convener of the federal partners to help highlight those resources available to state and local governments. And in a lot of ways, that work has now carried over into the Election Security Exchange,
Mhm.
where the departure of CISA has left this gap in services that we all grew accustomed to. And each jurisdiction, whether it's a state or a local county government, whatever it might be, had varying degree of um, uptake, if you will, of those services.
Mhm.
And but they grew accustomed to it. Whether it was information coming out from CISA for awareness of emerging threats potentially that were kind of grounded in how elections operate, or new products that were assembled over the years to help navigate particular threats and kind of a deeper dive to some extent. And that just depended on what we were seeing in the space.
Mhm.
So it might be a resource on phishing, it might be a resource on operations security, and CISA really kind of became this front-facing entity that was the kind of the central hub for election security, in close collaboration with other partners at the federal level. It might be the FBI, might be the Election Assistance Commission, could be the United States Postal Inspection Service, and we kind of acted as not only an information disseminator, an education resource, but we also had people in the headquarters team and eventually into the regional offices at CISA that were solely focused on election security, and they were going to help those state jurisdictions and local jurisdictions navigate the vast federal apparatus and how to get maybe a cybersecurity assessment and get and make a request for a tabletop coming from CISA. So because they only have so many resources,
Mhm.
resources are finite, and that was something that was being offered, and CISA had really staffed up to provide that, and then all of those experiences would feed into that national holistic view of what was going on in the election space so that everyone kind of knew what was happening. And if there was something we learned from an incident in one jurisdiction, it could get shared with another in a way that would protect the identity of where it occurred while giving the benefits of the lessons learned to everybody else in the ecosystem. And so when all of that changed, you now have like this unifying entity that's no longer there. People are now trying to figure out how can I navigate this increasingly complex environment, and where do I turn to for information that I used to be able to trust, and now I'm not really sure where to turn. So the Election Security Exchange was really intentional in that realm, so that it could essentially be a new entity that is really just to be a trusted resource, share information and education, but more importantly, be able to point people to more appropriate resources and kind of be that peer navigator so election officials can get right to what they need. So all of that experience at CISA had really helped kind of get to where we are today. And I know everyone's doing the best that they can, just nationally in elections, to navigate this environment so that they can continue to have secure and resilient systems.
Mhm. Yeah, so there were a lot of things that a lot of services and infrastructure that CISA provided. And so I guess when you look at the name of the election security exchange, I mean it's got the word exchange in it. Sounds to me like the gap that it's really trying to fill, and I think what you're trying to do with being associated with the election security exchange is that information sharing
Hmm.
piece that was really critical, a really critical thing that CISA provided to election officials in particular. Also, best practices, right? Responses. Is uh, is is the election security exchange going to be out looking for like emerging threats, which was something that I know CISA did very well in past election cycles?
So the exchange itself is not necessarily incident response or hands-on keyboard, um, and we don't have that like unique equity, the as I learned in the federal space. There's a lot of federal spiel I had to learn over the
Federal
last couple
keys,
of
yeah.
years. And one of those was equities in the
Equity.
space. And when it comes to national security, you're never going to entirely replace the aspect and unique access that federal government has to intelligence.
Mhm.
While I was at CISA, I was one of those individuals behind the doors that would help generate the 1A, 1B report that folks would see, after each federal election cycle about what those threats were. And eventually that would get distilled down to an unclassified version that everyone can look toward. But that's not necessarily something the exchange is working on right now. We're solely focused right now in the open source information environment, everything that is publicly available. And a
Mhm.
lot of that is intentional because we want this information to be accessible.
Mhm.
So we're relying on other partners and their reporting and what we're hearing on the ground because we have a lot of folks involved with the exchange that are out there going to conferences and events, and we really want to be out there as much as we can because we want to hear from everybody to hear what's going on, and we can help distill that, kind of cut through the noise of what everyone's hearing nationally and really say, these are the things you really should be focusing on based on our experience and what we're hearing from others in the field, that you can just focus here. Don't worry about these five other things that you're hearing about. This is really the important pieces here, and here are some things you might want to be considering to kind of take some defensive action or proactive action.
Mhm. So one of the other things that is just again fascinating about your background and your career trajectory is that you worked in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So can we talk a little bit about the time you worked in the Commonwealth and where you were the Deputy Commissioner of Elections? Because there was a lot going on when you were there, right? I mean, there was like pretty much complete overhaul of the voting systems.
Hmm.
I don't think Pennsylvania, I'm not an expert on Pennsylvania, but I don't think that Pennsylvania had a lot of experience with mail voting. And there was a transition to mail voting in Pennsylvania. There was the updating and development of a permanent voter list. A lot of election code and procedural change.
Hmm.
And then, of course, there was COVID, which then sort of just upended everything, right? So can we just kind of talk a little bit about, that time in your career, what you were doing, what you think was really important about the changes that occurred in Pennsylvania and really kind of how that shaped what you're doing today? Big question here, I know. I mean,
It's a wonderful question, and it is a large question, and so I'll definitely do my best to address it. There was a lot going on, to your
Mhm.
point, in Pennsylvania, not only from national visibility. PA used to be looked at, and to some extent still is when it comes to presidential races as a key state to watch. There was a lot of additional scrutiny that came out of Pennsylvania, particularly around 2020. I had my own personal experiences with that. That was frankly a fun time post-election in 2020. That's a whole nother story, but eventually, essentially the crux of it, I was on paternity leave and got doxxed, so that was fun. But you're right. I mean, right around like 2018, 2019, really the stuff I did as the deputy commissioner and director of election security and technology were rather similar.
Mhm.
As the deputy commissioner originally, when I came in to the Department of State, I essentially was the number two under Jonathan Marks and worked closely with not only elections, but I had direct oversight over the statewide uniform registry of electors, which is the fancy statutory name for the statewide voter registration database. And but we also had oversight over campaign finance disclosure, lobbying disclosure, and notaries. So we're balancing all that work, but of course, elections took a fair amount of that time.
Mhm.
So a lot of the day-to-day work that was being accomplished was kind of managing the voter registration database,
Mhm.
collaborating with the counties on guidance and sharing information. At that time, CISA was kind of this relatively new entity, and you also had DHS, Office of Intelligence and Analysis, so they were starting to build more relationship with the states. So we started becoming more of a broker between the federal apparatus and to the local level to say, like, here's information you should be paying attention to. And then you had all those things that you highlighted starting to land in that 2018, 2019 space where we basically modernized all the voting systems and transition the 67 counties to adopt systems with a voter verifiable paper record. Obviously, that's a critical update for public confidence and auditing. But then we had to coordinate and kind of tailor different approaches to each of the 67 counties because they're all at different levels of of sophistication and budgeting and size. And, so we were trying to help tailor recommendations that met their needs with some of our other partners at the state level. We even launched an election security work group task force with state agencies during all as this was going on, and brought together like the National Guard, state police, the state version of DHS, and a whole bunch of other people. And we all had worked together and kind of coordinating and planning around key election events, which led to us creating a statewide dashboard, if you will, that we invited emergency respondents to at the local level, IT, election officials, of course, and we were just bringing all these data sources together and essentially launched our own cybersecurity situational awareness room that the federal government was doing, and we kind of helped cross-pollinate information. But then what landed in all of that was really a historic overhaul of the election code.
Right.
And that's where we went to essentially no excuse absentee. So Pennsylvania has always had a form of absentee voting. It's actually baked into the state's constitution, which is a really important factor here, because the way it came about, we had to create essentially a whole new ballot type
Mhm.
to be able to give Pennsylvania no excuse absentee. As you know, getting over the constitutional layers there can be challenging. And so the the thought then was going through the statutory provisions. So they created what is called a mail-in ballot,
Mhm.
but it is essentially no excuse absentee. So that was one of the bigger aspects of what got pulled into that bill. It also shortened the voter registration deadline from 13 to 15 days before an election, or 30, excuse me, to 15. And created the concept of a permanent voter list in Pennsylvania. And there were some other things in there too, and some more nuanced, but those are some of the bigger aspects.
Mhm.
So not only is that a challenge from a messaging perspective, because you're taking some of these elements that have been really baked into the elections process in the Commonwealth, and communicating that is a challenge in and of itself.
Mhm.
But we're really trying to have routine discussions with the counties to just unpack what is the understanding of what's changing here, managing the various implementation periods. But then you have to take that actual administrative change and now change the technology behind it.
Mhm.
And, so all these things were just kind of hitting at the same time, have tremendous admiration for everybody involved, particularly the counties and navigating it, because it wasn't easy.
Mhm.
And while you're doing all of that, we literally just got all of ourselves in a room. I think we had like a dedicated room across the street where our office was, and we just like unpacked the bill, and we went through it line by line, and we started calling out changes to the system. But those are not small changes.
Mhm.
You're literally touching the heart of the voter registration database with changing deadlines. And, we used to have what was referred to as the 10-day rule when somebody first registers to vote. That had gone away too. So instead of this mandatory 10-day waiting period, that would essentially, a county would register someone and they kind of sit in this pending status sort of at the time. And then after the 10th day, as long as nothing had come back as undeliverable or anything like that, that person was then registered to vote. Well,
Mhm.
that went away. And so now you're like changing all that logic in the system too, amongst all those other things. So it's a really meticulous process, and we just had to get everyone in the room for weeks,
Mhm.
and really map all this out. But it touched everything from registering someone to vote to eligibility in the poll book and what was getting printed, to post-election reporting. So there's like all these things happening in the system. You had new voting equipment. And then when we finally got our heads around all of that, getting into early 2020, and had just spent a few months getting that implemented in the system, boom, COVID hits.
Exactly.
And And again, everyone was fantastic. They rolled up their sleeves. There's a lot of unknowns just from a personal perspective, like what is this? And am I going to be safe? And then and now you're asking these people to, be on the front lines and potentially expose themselves and help, continue to administer the election. Um, and so just tremendous gratitude all around. And then, oh, by the way, they delayed the primary and during COVID, and great call, but it was, we've never done that before. And again, shifting from like an April, May primary to June, you have a lot of system changes you've got to navigate to make sure nothing gets messed up or making sure counties can pull the right reports. And so lots happening there, but it was definitely a fantastic experience and just really it reinstilled my respect to those in the profession because you never know what you're going to deal with any given day. But those that really are in it, are in it for the belief behind it and they believe in democracy and so it's just the community itself is just fantastic.
So part of the reason I like to ask these kind of questions and talk about, kind of backgrounds and career paths and these experiences is like, when I have to talk to students and teach about how elections are run in election administration, a lot of times we talk about election officials and it's kind of, you know, to be honest, it sounds a little dull. But that's because it's the way I'm describing it. But hearing the personal story, I mean, hearing that story, I mean, that is not dull work. I mean, that is really exciting stuff. It's really impactful work, right? Obviously. But it's really challenging because like when you're working at that level, it seems to me that, your day job has got, you're doing 20 different things, right? And managing all of these different systems and managing all of this change, change management is something that's I think is really challenging in its own right. So I'm going to cut that video out. I'm going to show in class, like just to make sure this. And the students, when they hear about how complicated election administration is and how interesting it is and intricate it is, they get very, especially here at Caltech, they get very excited about it, because they're engineers, right, and scientists, and
Mhm.
hearing about all these complexities really does capture their attention. But I wanted to ask about we've seen a lot of jurisdictions go through these kinds of large changes. I mean, we saw it here in LA County, we see it in California quite a bit. Uh,
Mhm.
it's not just the county election officials. You mentioned them as an important stakeholder. Obviously, you have voters. You have all of the people who are running for elections, right? And all these changes directly affect, who gets elected to office and how they run their campaigns. How did you manage dealing with all of these different constituents who would be affected by all these changes and maintain their trust and confidence in the process? Keeping in mind as well, right, that Pennsylvania is a place that has really competitive elections, right? So how did you manage to maintain the high degree of trust and confidence that we see in Pennsylvania today?
I, uh, I mean, the short answer is you just do the best you can.
Mhm.
And, because comparatively, particularly in Pennsylvania, it has changed in recent years where they've staffed up more in the state election office, but comparatively, the state election office is really understaffed compared to other state jurisdictions. When I was there, I think we had like roughly 20-ish people, but they weren't solely dedicated to elections. That has since changed, and I think there are might be upwards of 30-ish. Um, and but it is a challenge. There's a lot of different stakeholder groups. I mean, not only do you have your primary stakeholder, which is the county officials, you're managing voter expectations, you're managing expectations from, just the administrative side of government with the governor's office because they have oversight here in Pennsylvania. And but then you're managing the actual rule makers and lawmakers and how that was navigated. And so we did an entire education campaign. I think it was called Ready to Vote, if I recall, something along those lines, where there was significant education around uh, the new voting systems, how they're used. We had overhauled our main voter information page and actually included like short, helpful videos on the various steps. We actually went around and did kind of like stakeholder meetings in a way, but they were essentially voting system demos. And we took a show around the road
Oh,
across the state and had, different demonstrations, encouraged counties to do their own. And the state was there. If counties had their own, the state would show up as if we
mhm.
could. And but we just wanted to really help acclimate people to those new systems. But we also had dedicated information sessions with various stakeholder groups and help drive out new messaging to them. And whether that was a notification on their side for like routine filing for something. But we did kind of like plain language reviews of our website, really engaged more on social media. So we really tried to hit as many of the audiences as we could with consistent messaging and and then help reinforce that confidence where the secretary would go out and do a lot of interviews around this. What does this mean? And then we had a lot of point-to-point meetings with legislative groups and legislators, and we certainly leaned on some of the stakeholder groups to help carry that messaging, where we used to have at least quarterly meetings with election stakeholder groups where we would kind of say, here's what's coming down the pike at the department from not only a technology perspective, but here's new business procedures we might be rolling out, and we would get kind of feedback on that to hear from them and, of course, from others. And that would help influence how we were approaching certain things to kind of get their perspective on whether a change was going to be either problematic or if we were kind of moving in a direction that had general alignment across a whole bunch of groups. So you really just do the best you can and hopefully the messaging sticks and it's effective. And if it's not, we want to take an opportunity to learn from that.
I wish I had been able at the time to really, sit and watch and participate in some of this because I really do think that given the scale of the changes that you talked about, that there's a real clear set of best practices here, right? From what happened in Pennsylvania, from the things that you did, right, to roll all these changes out. But again, like to make sure that everybody, stayed confident and trusted the system, in particular during a pandemic. I mean, it was just I really do commend the work that all election officials did during the pandemic because in 2020 we had a pretty much a flawless election, right? Uh,
hmm I
so
still look at the pandemic as like this really fine line in memory. A lot of people I talk to is like it was the times before the pandemic and the times
exactly.
after. It was such a big thing, and I think we're still wrapping our heads around it to some extent, but it was really just appreciation all around.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I tend to think that way too, but the period during the pandemic is a period of time I'd kind of like to forget. Uh, but any case, let's fast forward to a little bit to today and talk about, again, from your perspective, especially what you're seeing from some of your clients and what you're learning from the election security exchange. What do you think are the two or three really significant election security challenges that you see today here in the US as we're looking at the 2026 midterm election?
Yeah, so I would say going back to my earlier CISA comments, one of the biggest challenges right now is visibility across the nation.
Mhm.
And frankly, the changes that have occurred at the federal level sort of have created a gap that can invite a national security issue.
Mhm.
That's not to say it'll happen, but that lack of national visibility is concerning because you no longer have that overarching presence that has insight into where foreign adversaries are going and what they're thinking about. And it's no longer getting distilled down to state and local government, particularly election offices. Um, and then we also don't have like a central unifier anymore that knows of incidents that have occurred nationwide as opportunities and lesson learned for others. I mean, it's sort of coming back. You have this shift from where the MSISAC is now transitioning away from, well, has transitioned away from what was a federally funded, partially federal funded program. Now they're moving to a membership-based model where people can sign up for the multi-state information sharing and analysis center.
Mhm.
Yeah, but it's not a perfect replacement because not everyone has signed up for that, nor do they have the budgets for that necessarily, or there's potentially a resource gap for them to fill for procurement or something. And it just takes time. There's a lag there. But that, in my opinion, is the number one pressing issue is somebody that has that insight and visibility of what's going on and how can I turn that into actionable guidance that used to cover the entire nation. But the other thing I would say is there's a number of resource constraints that are out there. So and certainly ties into the first, but you've had significant turnover in the election profession.
Mhm.
You have limited budgets, and states are now and locals are now trying to grasp with how do I fill some of those service gaps that I was relying on the federal partners for, whether that is a tabletop exercise or they had on-site physical security assessments or more in-depth cybersecurity assessments. They're now looking to turn to the private sector for that. And again, there's a lag time. You got it. There's procurement, there's budgeting, and the budget might not be there. I was just at the National Association of Counties, and one of the topics, particularly here in budgeting, was the revenue sources. They're not. It's not a reliable source anymore, and the revenues are shrinking.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of real challenges that are happening, not all directly in elections, but when you've seen this shift from the federal government away from direct election security support, and you've seen this shift in some states moving away from outside money to help support elections, this storm is kind of brewing a little bit where there could be potential vulnerabilities in just the entire infrastructure,
Mhm.
no matter how hard you work to kind of fill your gaps. I mean, I'm just looking at the telecom vulnerabilities over the last year or two, like for Salt Typhoon. I mean,
Mhm.
these are incredibly sophisticated nation state actors that have been able to bore their way into some of this infrastructure that we might not see right away. Perfect
Mhm.
example. And that's why we really need a whole of government approach to this. And when the security landscape is now fragmented as it is,
Mhm.
it's challenging to navigate. So those two areas are really concerning, and the extent that we can help kind of repair that or formulate new partnerships that start to address that, I think is great. But the one message that I would also kind of pair together with this is that the fundamentals in cybersecurity and just security generally very much apply here. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with a nation state actor. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with a hacktivist, whatever it might be. The fundamental processes still matter. And so as
Mhm.
long as you're taking those basic steps to secure your systems or reinforce through staff training, those can make a tremendous difference when you're looking to ward off potential threats.
So you didn't mention artificial intelligence. So let's start by, do you think that AI, does it generate new threats to election security? And then there's this part two, which is, um, or does it just, and or does it amplify the existing kind of threat matrix that exists around election security in the US?
So I love this topic right now, just for elections generally. AI it kind of has like this dual-headed like nature to it, where there's this incredible capacity behind it and benefit,
Hmm.
and then there's also the other side of it, the risk reward, where you're also inviting potential risk. And personally, I think it's a great opportunity for the election space, for a number of reasons that we've talked about, but particularly when it comes to capacity. Election officials don't have a lot of staffing, don't have a lot of funding. This is a way to start bridging some of that.
Hmm.
Um, my take on it is I usually like to ground it where I don't necessarily think it creates a ton of new threats.
Hmm.
I think it exacerbates existing threats
Hmm.
more than anything else. And really AI is an opportunity, much like it is for an election official to be able to leverage it to do like mundane tasks and kind of let them focus on more pressing things. Same idea behind a threat actor. You might have somebody that, knows enough around tooling, but they might not be a sophisticated coder. And AI can help lower that barrier to entry for someone to launch their own attack and do some of that work for them. And we're seeing that, and certainly in the information space. Those threats are not new to elections. What it does do is it increases the sophistication for detection,
Hmm.
and it produces scale. And that's why having those procedures in place or focusing on those fundamentals can really be a helpful deterrent or mitigator here, because we've already seen it in elections, but you just got to be able to respond quickly and effectively and consistently. So yeah, I'm of the realm that it's not necessarily creating a whole lot of new threats, but it does, throw a lot of existing threats back at us.
Yeah, yeah, it can be used to scale those up and to amplify them in certain ways. Now, but let's talk about the benefit side too. Not just on, the like, yes, it makes up for lots of missing resources. It helps with staffing issues, but on the security side, uh, are you seeing that folks are actually using AI tools to, say, help support or to help improve these basic cybersecurity practices that you talk about?
I I think we're seeing some really interesting and emerging growth here.
Mhm.
Almost like piloting to some extent, where not necessarily born in the elections environment,
Mhm.
but you are seeing this in other sectors. And I think I haven't read into it myself, but I think Anthropic, through Claude, just released a cybersecurity tool through their program to help check for a certain list of vulnerabilities.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of interesting applications that are happening through research right now that can be leveraging, machine learning and other aspects of AI to look for, um, potential vulnerabilities on the network or look for inconsistent application of security countermeasures, and then kind of roll that up into reporting for either the IT office or other decision makers to kind of say, like, here are areas that we think you need to be addressing first and foremost. Um, but I'm also seeing it on the resilience side, and this directly in elections where there are a couple of jurisdictions experimenting with AI, generative AI in this case, where they're using it for their own tabletop exercise game.
Mhm.
And they're feeding in a bunch of back-end information through varying degree of injects, information about that jurisdiction's election processes, and then they're basically making it a dice game where it's throwing a random inject at you for you to react, and you can have it build on it, or you can just have it turn to a new inject after that. So it's kind of fun.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of interesting applications that are coming about both in the security realm for vulnerability and threat detection,
Mhm.
and but certainly when it comes to training and exercises that
Right.
I think over the next year or so will really be beneficial to the community.
That actually, the second point here leads me to just a great idea, which is to actually be using some of these AI tools, again, to build these kind of tabletop exercises and simulations. I hadn't even thought about that. Because I was thinking more about, like using AI agents to actually, do kind of, white hat kind of testing, right? To just, target election systems, target databases and I think, as you said, put together some sort of reporting, right? And especially during election season, where they could be kind of constantly observing the cybersecurity issues that you talk about, right? And produce, reports not only on threats that might be existing, but also loopholes that might holes in the system that might be developing. Are you seeing development of a kind of agentic AI in that kind of area in cybersecurity general?
I've seen some aspects of it in notably the healthcare
Mm,
sector that I think will have some benefits into just general infrastructure management, where, you know, the health sector is particularly vulnerable, particularly when it comes to the endpoint devices and some of the equipment that they use to, support life and safety.
mm,
And they're very challenging to keep those patched and updated. And so I've seen some opportunities in research where they're rolling out various versions of agentic AI to help navigate and do assessments of those devices and the network and it also kind of looks into the organization's policies and procedures for security configuration. So they're combining these various aspects of AI coming together that I think will be very powerful. And as they work through those pilots and opportunities, I think it's really going to transform how we're navigating the security landscape. I mean, and again, AI isn't new in this
mm.
realm either,
Right.
right? It's been around for a long, long time.
Uh-huh.
It's really just been kind of in the forefront of a lot of people's mind over the last couple of years with the commercial release of Gen AI tools.
Hmm.
Um, and but it's a lot of security partners have been leveraging various forms of AI for a while to help kind of tighten that gap between detection and response. Because that's a real challenge in for a security practitioner. So I do think that in the long run, agentic AI and additional transformation over the next couple of years will be um, a huge change and be a welcome opportunity for a lot of the jurisdictions that don't have sophisticated budgets for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is exciting. Some exciting ideas just to pop into my head as we've been talking, about how AI can be used to help support cybersecurity, especially of elections. It's interesting that that's not really happening quite now, but I can see that that's going to be happening very soon. Um, so I want to throw a wild card at you. Can you tell us like how you caught the elections bug in the first place? I mean, what's the origin story? Why did you get excited about working in elections?
I'd say there's always been a little bit in me. I was a poli sci major in college. Not necessarily. There wasn't a lot of work that we did when I went through on the domestic side. It was always more comparative on to other countries and a lot of the philosophical background. But I've always had a little bit in me that loved the idea of elections and certainly democracy in our space. And I started getting a little more deeper into the space right after college. I was on the political side for a little bit and helped manage a few campaigns at the local level and eventually a congressional race. And one of my former colleagues that I met, he was the deputy commissioner of elections here in Pennsylvania, and I knew he was departing the position. I was like, I really enjoyed some of this work. I've seen the outside, always had an appreciation from college. And I said, what, I want to interview for this position. And frankly, the rest has been history from there. And it just love the work, love the mission. You meet some fantastic people along the way and have just really good connections in the community that make you want to keep doing this. And there's new problems that hit the space too. And I love, either trying to solve them or at least, seeking out who knows how to solve it because, I don't know everything. And it's just nice to kind of have that. There's kind of like a family nature I've experienced in elections over the years, and it's hard to get out of it. Once it hits you, you're like, I don't really want to leave the space. I was really torn, for me when all the changes were happening at CISA. I was like, oh, what happens now? Like, I love this, and I was like personally devastated. But you know what? You find your way, and it just you're there, you're here, and but everyone is that way. Like some way, at some point, some people may leave the profession, but they find they kind of find their way back, and you're like, hey,
Yeah,
you weren't gone
exactly.
that long.
Right. Yeah, again,
Oh
like,
yeah.
when I talk to students about, these kind of career paths, I mean, there's always this really interesting kind of serendipity to it, right? You don't have a linear career path, right?
Hmm.
And things just, you take advantage of opportunities, and you learn from those opportunities. And like, you've had this incredibly fascinating career so far. There's a lot more ahead for you, I know, but so far it's been super fascinating.
Yeah, and I would have never have guessed where I would be, to
Right.
be honest. Like I when I was at the Department of State, I was like, I love this job. It's hard some days and it's a lot of work. But I would never have guessed I was going to go to CISA, got
Hmm.
the call, and I was like, yeah, would love to support this at the national level. And love that work. Great colleagues, not only in the agency, but of course, you're still touching those in the community and just helping them, which was great. And then that changed, and the mission is still the same. It's just how we navigate it has changed. And so, yeah, never would have guessed I would have been here, but love it. And there's been so many things I've learned over the years, and just keep learning every day.
Well, one of the things I love about these conversations is that I just looked at my watch, and I've had you now for 52 minutes, and it's like I think we could talk for another 3, 4 hours easily, which
Totally could.
we'll do that. I'm going to take you up on that, but not today. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you wanted to mention?
I think I would just say, if for those, and this is an eye toward just the current environment,
Hmm.
is is don't be afraid to reach out
Hmm.
to your colleagues, because everybody has been very supportive throughout this. And, whether that's reaching out to the exchange, we want to be able to help, or if you just need some advice, like everyone is here to support each other. So just don't be afraid to do it. We're all navigating something different right now. And the best path forward for us to figure it out is just leaning on each other.
No, that's great. So how would someone, an election official who might just have heard about the election security exchange here, how would they reach out?
So you can go to securingelections.org.
Hmm.
You can sign up for our newsletter if you wish. And we have various forms of lists you can subscribe to. So one is newsletters. So we're putting out routine content about new resources for election security and new training opportunities. So encourage everybody to go to that site, securingelections.org, and get engaged. But one of the things that we have there too is a central resource hub. And so we're really trying to be that trusted one-stop shop for election security. So as we're finding new resources in the space, whether it's from a federal entity, an industry partner, even another state or local jurisdiction, we're putting that all in one central repository for people to access information. So anything out in the realm of election security, really encourage everyone to go there, check it out, and if there's something missing, just let us know. Our contact's on the website, and we'd love to help.
Is that available to people like me too? Can I sign up?
Yeah,
Okay.
everything we do, everything we're doing right now is publicly available. Anyone can sign up for the newsletter. Doesn't matter if you're an actual election practitioner or academia,
Mhm.
industry, available to anyone that would like to subscribe.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to subscribe. So Moser Consulting, how does somebody find out more about what you're doing there?
So you can just email me. My email is Mike at Moser-Solutions.com. So folks can just reach out to me there, and be happy to see how I can assist.
Okay. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been great. And I'm going to take you up on this. We'll have to talk more at some point, maybe later this year, about, how the exchange is functioning and kind of what impact it's having, because I think it's going to have a big impact.
Yeah, would love to. Yep. Thank you. Again, appreciate the chance, and it's been great talking to you.
Great. Thank you.